What is up, guys? This is Zach from Mather's Escape, and today I have 5 crappie fishing tips and tricks for you guys. And so over the last couple of years I've caught tons of crappie. Crappie are great eating, but I want to give you some tips on how to catch them. And so my tip number 1 is to always, instead of just using one jig, there's no reason not to use a 2 jig rig. Oh, that feels like a good one. Oh, it's 2! 2 at a time! Guys, I just got 2. Here's the one. Right below it, the second one. 2 in 1 cast. Doesn't get any better than that. And so right here I have a 2 jig rig, and basically what this allows me to do is fish 2 different colors and 2 different size jigs. So a lot of times I'm finding they're only hitting like a 1/64th ounce jig, or maybe they're hitting the bigger jigs. Both these jigs are different sizes and different colors, so I can really hone in with the 2 jig rig on what the fish are biting on. In the winter, I find they're usually taking a lot smaller jigs, like these 1/64th ounce jigs, but in the summer, they'll hit much bigger jigs. So I really like having 2 jigs. I have about a 2-foot space between them, and another thing is sometimes if I'm vertically jigging, I'll put about 4 feet between them, and then I can kind of gauge what depth the crappie are at, if they're biting on the bottom or the top one. So always use that 2 jig rig. This is 4-pound test line, which is what I use for most crappie on a light action spinning rod. But definitely try out that 2 jig rig. Alright, so tip number 2 is to use some crappie nibbles on your jigs. At first I was a little suspicious, but recently when I was using that 2 jig rig, I'd start using crappie nibbles, and I seem to get more bites on the ones with the crappie nibbles. Guys, you can see the crappie nibble in the crappie's mouth. And I only put a crappie nibble on the top jig, and he just took the top jig. And before that, they were taking the bottom jig. So maybe the crappie nibbles do work. Also, when fishing with friends, I seem to outfish them a little bit, and a lot of times we're using the same jig, so it might be the crappie nibbles. I've heard different things on these. I think a lot of people say that the crappie nibbles don't make the fish bite more, but they make the fish hold on a little longer to that jig because they taste that. It tastes more like a real fish, and they're less likely to spit it out. So go ahead. One of these things is like $4, and this has lasted me like 2 years, so it's real cheap. Alright guys, so moving on to tip number 3, and that's what time of year to target crappie. So crappie can be caught at all times of the year, but there's certain times of the year where you can have more fishing success. I find the best time is during the crappie spawn, which in central Missouri is around Mother's Day or May. But if you go farther north, like to Minnesota, they spawn in about June. If you go farther south to Florida, they can spawn as early as February. So you need to look at your latitude and your local fishing report to find out when they're biting or when they're spawning. But basically when the crappie spawn, they get really aggressive. I find they bite really well on minnows, and you're only going to be fishing in 2 to 4 feet of water, anywhere where you find like rocky structure or submerged trees. And the other nice thing is you can catch them from the shore. You don't have to have a boat to go out there because they're right there on the banks. Another good time to catch crappie, which a lot of people don't think, is winter. In the winter, the crappie really condense and they follow structure. So if you find a bridge pillar or docks or submerged trees, fish those areas. Ooh, this might be a keeper. Might be a keeper, guys. Let's see. Get on the top jig. You can see my bottom jig right there. You want to use a really small jig, like a 1/64th ounce jig, and move it very slowly. I usually find in the winter minnows don't work too well, but a real small jig worked real slowly in a place with structure, like a bridge or a dock, works really well. And of course, summer, again, the fish are a little more scattered, so they're a little easier to catch. You just usually don't catch as big of numbers as maybe in the winter when you do get on the fish, but you can catch them all times of the year, but remember the spawn. Alright guys, so tip number 4 is how to hook minnows for crappie fishing, and I actually made a video on this, but I just want to go over it again real fast in this video. But basically you want a really long shanked hook that's pretty thin, because the thinner the hook, the less likely it's going to kill the minnows quick. And so basically I usually go through the nostrils of the minnow, so I just go up through the nostrils, and this keeps swimming pretty straight, and I find to live the longest, and I have a great catch ratio because it's pretty hard for the crappie to rip it through the nostrils. You just don't want to put it too far back because their head's right there, so you got to be careful of that. But going through the nostrils and up like that keeps the minnow upright and keeps them swimming for a long time. So that's how I hook my minnows for crappie fishing. Finally guys, there's 2 points I really want to drive home, and that's when crappie fishing, you always got to locate the structure. So docks, bridges, submerged trees. As soon as I hit a lake, if I see any bridges that go across the lake, that's one of the first places I'll hit for crappie because I find those are some of the best. Oh, dang it. No. 4 to 8. Oh. Catching babies. Double header. The second place I'll hit is if I see any docks, I'll go and jig those and throw some minnows out. And the third place, if I see any submerged trees, I'll definitely hit those up. But usually crappie are around 10 feet deep, and I don't know, in the summer I find them around 10 feet down in about 15 feet of water, but they vary a little bit. But they're not on the bottom and they're not at the surface. They're kind of in that suspended depth area. And the other thing I'd really like to drive home is to use 4-pound test line. I had a friend that was crappie fishing with me the other day. He was using 10-pound test line, the same jig, catching nothing, and I was catching them left and right. It was just because of that line size difference. If they'll see that line and they won't take it, so you need to be using the smaller pound test lines to increase your catch. So I hope you learned something here today, and thanks for watching.